JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, and I'm delighted to have joining me on my show today, Daryl Deliman from San Clemente in California in the United States of America. He's joining me to talk a little about himself and his book, Real Estate, Investing as a Lucrative Hobby and a Tax Shelter, your guide to success in generating consistent rental income. So who is Daryl Deliman, everybody? Well, Daryl and his wife, Jacqueline, currently reside in San Clemente, California, in a home with a panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. Wow, that sounds good, doesn't it, everybody? Daryl has recently retired from a major American company selling scientific lab equipment, and while Jacqueline continues to serve the community as a teacher. Daryl's hobbies include guitar, tennis, skiing, snorkeling, and a host of other outdoor pursuits. Daryl spent the first 2 years of his education as a midshipman at the US Naval Academy at Annapolis. He then obtained a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Miami, followed by a master's in chemical oceanography at the University of Washington. And several years later, he was awarded an MBA at California State University, Fullerton. So you'll be justified in asking yourself, where does real estate fit into this global image of Daryl Deliman? Well, I think we need to ask him, everybody. So let's ask Daryl to come and join me on the show, because it's getting pretty lonely here chatting to myself here. Daryl Deliman from San Clemente in the United States of America. Come and join me on the show.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you having me, and I look forward to explaining more about the book and what motivated me and what got us going here. So anyway, my father and grandfather were both mildly invested in real estate, had rental houses, and I kind of looked at that and said, yeah, I can do that, but I think I want to build it to a bigger scale. So I pulled a good income selling laboratory equipment. I'm a science geek. I certainly enjoyed what I did, meeting with professors, laboratory managers, and that was something I enjoyed, doing very much. And I pulled a good income that way. And as such, I would want to see what I could do to shelter the income. So I'm in one of the heaviest tax states, California. So I wanted to see what I could do to shelter the income legally, and then invest and build equity, and eventually get to a situation of positive flow with the rental houses. So we intended to start slowly, but we kind of jumped into it with both feet. My brother, my dad, and I were all three involved in what we called Deliman Investment Company. And we were fortunate enough to acquire 13 houses together in one of these HUD, HUD sales. So that got us started with those 13 houses. So we were able to jump in with both feet at that. At that point, as many family partnerships do, we had divergent goals. So my brother and my dad kind of checked out, and I bought them out, and kind of expanded from there.
Now, Daryl, when I look at the book, it's a pretty comprehensive book, everybody. And the first couple of chapters in your book, under the headings, Getting Started, Selecting the Property and Negotiating the Asking Price, you start off by giving us a brief historical account of how this journey of real estate investing stems back to the mid-80s. As you've already said, very briefly, your father, Daniel, a retired school teacher who had some experience in owning rental properties. And then, of course, your brother, Dennis, being a real estate professional. Now, in these first few chapters, you talk about appreciation, tax relief, positive cash flow, foreclosures, geographic selection considerations, calculating, multi-unit variations. There's an aspect, everybody. listed properties, lower prices, building engineer inspections, and title searches. There's a whole host of things going on in these opening chapters, Daryl. Would you care to enlighten us? You know, because I've only just skimmed over this. Please
Certainly.
tell us.
Certainly. What I'm trying to point out here, and I think is my friend and tennis opponent, banker Bob Keenast, put in the foreword. What I'm trying to present here is the multifaceted approach of real estate investing. The examples I give, you can select the right property and get a good tenant, but if interest rates are too high and your payments are too high. PITM is the term that I used when I was in graduate school. Principal, interest, insurance, taxes, maintenance, and management. If PITM is too high, and mainly that's going to be based on the interest rate and the mortgage you're paying and the maintenance required on the house, then you're still in negative cash flow. So it's multifaceted. You want to get the best loan you can, lowest interest rate when that's possible. And then from there, there are other facets to it. Selecting a good tenant, screening good tenants, because if you get somebody in, what all of us landlords want are tenants that will stay and pay on time. So that's part of the selection. And of course, the starting point is selecting a property in a growth area where in a year, 2 years from now, your property will increase by 5, 7, 10% in value. Now, of course, there's a lot you can do to increase the value of the property, to improve it. There's some cosmetic things you can do it. In today's world, everyone is expanding with the ADU. The additional dwelling unit. So in my case, I went to Tough Shed and we added an additional room to a couple of our smaller houses. In today's world, you can do more than that. You can add multiple units on the same property because the movement is towards the ADU, additional dwelling units. So that's that's pretty much what I'm trying to present here is the multifaceted approach. So you've got to select the right property, financing, get the best tenant, and then maintain the tenants, improve the property. So you've got to approach all the aspects of it.
And when I looked at the book, Daryl, I think you did a very, very comprehensive view of that, because I certainly learned a lot from it. Now, I know I live in the United Kingdom, so the rules and regulations over here are slightly different. And I know that this book is really aimed at the US market, and particularly those who are looking to, who are earning over $100,000 and above, and are looking for tax shelters, legal tax shelters, and also to create some future investments and money as well, because that's the whole concept of this book, everybody. But I want to go to, Daryl, if you don't mind. There's a couple of chapters, financing and selecting tenants, which I thought were very important, and that's why I've highlighted them. That's why I want to talk about them. Other people's money, credit appraisals, interviewing tenants, agreements, and and your documents. And you've documented an interview with Kerry Spellman. So my question to you here, Daryl, is how important to prospective investors is the contents of these two areas in giving guidance, and is a lot of what you say throughout the book taken somewhat by your own experiences in the profession?
Absolutely. When I was selecting my own tenants, I would sometimes be a little bit too trusting. I wouldn't do the full screen. So as Carrie tells us in her book, or in the chapter of the book that she helped me write, she has several different ways. I mean, you do the usual, property screening that you can. And then she kind of surprised me in the one, she always walks the person out to their car because she wants to look at the car, because if your car is sloppy and dirty, then that's the same way you're going to keep the house or your apartment or whatever you're going to live in. So that's part of the aspect there. I appreciate you bringing up the different approaches here, but yeah, my target market here, I think, is a single person making over 100,000 or a couple making over 100,000, and with long-term plans of investing and building equity and then sheltering that income. Different from the UK and most other tax situations, we have what we call depreciation. It's explained in the book in the chapter where I did the interview with Don Saltikoff, my IRS. He's been my IRS and my tax man for many years, does my tax returns for me. And he presents the depreciation concept. So basically the concept is pretty simple. You buy a property, you have land, let's say the land's worth 100,000. The house on the land is worth 400,000. Okay, so you can depreciate that house over 27 and a half years. So that directly takes away from your taxable income. So this allows you to build in this direction so you can gain equity and you can also shelter your income. In doing this myself, I was pulling a good income and I would be able to shelter it. I was tax exempt, which seemed to irritate and I guess intrigue many of my colleagues. How was I tax exempt? Well, I had enough properties with this depreciation that I did not have to pay any taxes on it. Well, it says I'm not paying any taxes on it, but actually I'm paying property taxes. So the tax man gets his bite one way or another. But it was taxes on property taxes on the houses. So in this way, I was able to shelter my income. I would have more income to invest and buy more houses. So that's what worked out in the long-term plan.
I love the story of the car. Oh, let's go and evaluate the clients and what their car looks like. So if you turn up an old rust bucket, don't bother. You won't be getting a tenancy.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me. But
that's cute.
Carrie is, she's very knowledgeable. She's been doing this a long time, so she's got her tricks and she's got the special things she's looked at. But she's never gotten me anything but an excellent tenant. So yeah, it helps to have somebody else do this for you.
So there you go. Turn up in posh shoes, get a posh car, you'll get a tenancy. We're not going any further. Daryl, let's move on. Let's take the listeners to chapters 5 and 6, headed up Care and Feeding of Tenants, Handyman, or Do You Want to Take That Urgent Call? You start off by saying, for landlords, good tenants are the lifeblood of our businesses. You cover issues around understanding tenant contracts, raising the rent, paying the rent, eviction, pets, monitoring your property, and the benefit of good handymen. Would you care to expand, what you're talking about here and why you've put the subject matters in these 2 chapters? Because obviously they are very, very important. Otherwise, you wouldn't put them in.
Yeah.
I'm right, aren't I?
Oh, certainly, you're very correct in that, John, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Once you get the right tenant in your property, okay, they're always going to have demands. They're going to want certain upgrades and whatever, and you as a landlord have to decide, is this upgrade really worth it? Will the next tenant at this property want this upgrade? There are certain, it seems like women always want kitchen remodels. Those can be very expensive. So you can do some of it, but maybe not all of it. But so you do want to accommodate a good tenant. You do want to make upgrades that are of mutual benefit. That is, that will improve the property and will please the tenant. So those are some of the things you want to do for the, for the tenant to maintain a good business relationship with them. The tenant contracts I talk about. There's a lot of things that people do wrong in tenant contracts. You've always got to have a late fee. If you don't receive the rent by the 10th, you need your money. You've got to pay mortgage, et cetera, so you want your money on time. And you can make a little extra money with the late fee for tenants that aren't keeping up. Beyond that, maintaining the property and keeping your tenant content. I usually have a annual rent increase. Now, in this annual rent increase, everybody understands inflation, and this is part of inflation. But also, you want to justify the rent increase. If you've done improvements on the property, and you probably have, then you want to sit there and state that, yes, we've improved your property this much. And also, I like to give a third source, usually Zillow or Redfin, that shows a proposed rent for the house. It's usually more than what I'm charging. I like to keep my rents maybe 5% under market, so people have less tendency to move, because turnover, of course, is the worst enemy of the landlord. If you can keep a tenant in, staying and paying, that's what you're looking for. And many of my tenants now in the Inland Empire have been there 10, 15 years. Okay. And they tolerate my annual rent increases that are somewhere between 5 and 9%. So, but I like to write a letter and say, I appreciate your tenancy. We've made these improvements. Zillow says that you should rent for $3,000, and so I'm raising your rent to $2,700. So, gee, you're getting a good deal. So those are part of the things that we're covering in the care and feeding of tenants. And also, you have to make sure they're maintaining the property. You have to show a presence, in the property. So I have my notices that several of the tenants have complained about. So they're parking on the lawn, I'll get one notice on that. They're not taking care of the yard, I have another notice on that. And I'll leave that with them. So that's part of just letting the tenant know that you're there, you're looking, you're not a remote landlord, so you are paying attention to the property. So we like to maintain that sort of relationship. Going on from there, a handyman. Okay, I have enough properties that I have a full-time handyman, and I don't want to take that a midnight call. Hey, my water heater is broken. He takes that call. That's part of his responsibility. It doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, somebody else is there to respond and to do good work on the property, and hopefully try and get along well enough with the tenant. Because you're entering somebody else's property, and quite often I have single mothers, and they want to be real careful about that. So anyway, having a good full-time handyman has been very useful for me in maintaining the properties.
I love the story about the kitchen. And yes, when you're selling a house, an estate agent will tell you, if you want to sell a house, certainly over here in the UK, the bathroom and the kitchen and the ensuites and the bedroom very much appeal to the lady, and she will ultimately make the final decision, believe you me.
Right.
Whereas the guy, it's probably the garage or it's something else, and what's the rate and how much are you going to have to pay for this. So they come from two different schools. But at the end of the day, believe you me, everybody, when it's buying a house, the lady makes the final decision. I know. So let's go to, I thought your approach about upgrading the property and all the issues that entails, again, is very, very comprehensive. And as I said, we've already touched on this. I like the story of the lady who basically, she wanted a new kitchen. And you and Augusto agreed that the kitchen did need some updating. But what for me was a fundamental subject matter was your explanation of Section 8, Housing Authority.
Mm-hmm.
And you go on in here to talk about embrace or avoid. So in Chapter 8, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. What's this about? And for me, surely ensuring that the properties are maintained at a very high level leads to a happy client, which leads to a happy business, which leads to a successful rental income business. I'm right, aren't I? But talk to us about Section 8 here as well.
Yes, Section 8, or Section 8 Housing Authority, or I use it as my Chapter 8 specifically. there's several, we get several different opinions on that, depending on the area you're in. If you're in an upscale area, and you maybe have an apartment building or a triplex or something like that, and you put a Section 8 tenant in there, you're going to irritate everyone else, and you can bring the property down. And the Section 8 tenants, they're basically, the word's welfare, okay, however you want to put it. They're getting a government assistance. They have to apply for that and get accepted. So they're getting a government assistance there. So if it's an upscale area, chances are you want to avoid Section 8 tenants because it can, drag the property down. If you're in another area that might be a blue collar or, almost slum or something like that, then Section 8 might be the only way that you can, get full occupancy on the property. So you'll have to work with Section 8 and make it work. Now, there's good and bad to Section 8. Obviously, since it's, the government's involved, they're going to inspect and make sure that the unit meets their standards. Usually the standards are reasonable, but sometimes they can ask you to raise a wall or move, do some structural changes, in which case you'll say, thanks, I don't want your tenant. I'll get a standard tenant rather than Section 8 tenant because I don't want to play by your rules. But usually their requests are reasonable and you can get a Section 8 tenant in there. With the Section 8 tenant, Section 8 will usually pay most of the rent. The tenant pays a smaller portion. So, it's welfare and it's supporting them. The plan usually works out pretty well because Section 8 usually pays top dollar for the property. So you'll get, you'll get your total rent. Of course, Section 8 automatically pays you online and, on the first of the month. That's great. Then the tenant is supposed to make their portion of the payment by the end of the month. By the 10th of the month. So that usually works out. And I've had, good and bad with Section 8. And, many cases when we had, down years in the Inland Empire, I went to Section 8. I asked them, I said, do you have any tenants? I've got several houses available here. And then their tenant would come over and apply. So the Section 8 has worked out, for us in many cases, but it depends on where you want to use that and where you need to use it.
Yes, I think it'd be fair enough to say that your real estate investment portfolio is, you have to have a balanced clientele. You're not going to get all wealthy tenants. In life, you have to take a little bit of the rough as well as the smooth. Fair enough.
Right.
Now, for me, Daryl, I think what you're talking about in chapters 9 and 10, expanding your real estate portfolio and phases and tax benefit, are two pivotal areas. You touch upon financing options, low risk plan, refinancing, buying another, save or borrow as needed, 20% deposit, the 4 phases of real estate investing. And under tax benefits, you have an interview with Don. I do apologize if I forgot the pronunciation right. Saltkioff, CPA, and you touch on IRS audits. And you also been tax exempt, expanding using the Rossi exchange. Now, can you just enlighten us here as to what you are talking about in these chapters 9 and 10?
Certainly. Well, I think we've gone into in previous chapters, we talked a little bit about financing. So you, of course, want to get the lowest interest rates you can. You want to maintain excellent credit on your own behalf. So you can get the best possible interest rate. Now, beyond that, I offer Dean plan. Dean was my neighbor as a kid growing up, and we used to build forts together and the like. And and his plan was rather interesting, and we talked about it at our 10-year reunion. What he and his wife both worked in the aerospace and defense industry, and they made very good money doing such. So they would buy one house in Torrance, and they would, and Dean was truly a perfectionist. He would put the best flooring in, the best, best wallpaper, the best upgrade everything, because he liked doing that. Okay, and he was very good at it. So he would do that. They would stay in one house for a year. Okay, they would maintain that. Like I said, they both made good enough money, so they would move to the next house. Okay, and they would do the same thing. So they would stay a year and a half in one house and then move on from there. This is what I call the Dean plan. Well, what's the key advantage there? In financing, okay, if you're owner occupied, you usually only have to put 10% down. Also, you usually get half a point better interest rate. So if you're owner occupied, then you can buy this house, lower down payment, lower interest rate, and stay there a year and move on. Okay, you can't, in today's world, you can't get away with that for very long, because the banks will catch on to you and see what you're doing, and they, won't give you the financing you want. But you can do it, 2 or 3 times at least, or 3 or 4 times. I think Dean did, Dean and his wife did it 5 times. So that's one plan of expanding. What I usually had to use was I would refinance one house after it had increased in value enough, and then take the proceeds from there and buy another property. So that was what usually worked out for me. So I would have excess income from my employment selling laboratory equipment, and then that combined with the income I would get from refinancing a house easily gave me enough to buy more houses or whatever I wanted from there. So that usually worked out quite well in expanding from there. But what was the other topic, other question beyond expanding?
So we have the IRS audits, being tax exempt, and also it says your interview with Don Saltikoff. Saltikoff.
Okay.
Have I got it right?
Don Saltikoff.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It's a very common name in Moscow. Anyway, yes, but Don's been here for several generations. So yes, what Don presents to us is, as we've mentioned earlier, the being tax exempt. Okay, as a real estate professional, there are several requirements to becoming tax exempt. So I would have to state and present that I spent more time in real estate than I spent in any other job, and I would have to have a minimum number of hours per year that I spent in real estate in order to qualify and be tax exempt. So, in my tough years, I was working, easily 60 hours a week between the real estate and then my, 9 to 5 job selling laboratory equipment. So that would show the benefit. Now, one of the other ways of expanding property is the IRS offers you a 1031 exchange. So you sell one property, then you have 45 days to identify the next property you're going to buy, and then you have 180 days to close escrow on it. In this concept, you don't have to pay the taxes from selling the one property. You can be tax exempt and pass that on. So, eventually you're going to sell a property, and eventually, Uncle Sam will get his bite, but he at least allows you to pass this on with the 1031 exchange. So it's an excellent approach if you want to use that. But those are the various different ways that you can expand your real estate network and get better cash flow, etc.
I have to say, Daryl, when I was looking at your book, I thought, oh, chapter 11, I've got to include this in the interview, everybody. We've got the short stories in this chapter, everybody, the antidotes, the SWAT teams, who should pay the trash bill, property manager from hell, your pet is,
Yeah.
and the handyman did what? And the police shot my dog in the ass, trained cockroaches. This is a slightly different chapter, everybody. And I just think this is Daryl Deliman put a little bit of humor into what is a hard fact book. I'm right here, aren't I? This was you putting a little bit of humor in.
Yes. Yeah.
Why did you
Thank you
do
for
it?
noting that, John.
Why did you put
I
this
say thank you
chapter
for
in?
noting that, John. Well, when I was in college at University of Miami, I used to write comedy for a stand-up comic who used to present at our shows there at University of Miami. So I've always had humor in my veins, and my mother was a Irma Bombach type writer, and always wanted to inject humor in it. So I was always looking for humorous situations, and I was hoping to amuse as well as, I guess, inspire those. Yeah, we had a lot of fun things that went on. I mean, I think the SWAT team was the scariest one, where we had a bad guy who wasn't supposed to see his daughter, and he snuck in to see his daughter and did this at gunpoint. So the SWAT team came in and kicked in doors and found him cowering in a corner with his 22 pistol, and of course, when SWAT comes in with all their big guns pointed at him, so he of course gave himself up. But that was a strange one. It cost me a couple of doors, but that wasn't too terribly expensive. But yeah, there's a lot of other fun occurrences that happened there. And when the long-term real estate broker, she complimented me on that chapter also. She said, "Yeah, your anecdotes are worth the price of the book itself." So I certainly appreciated that. But yeah, there's a lot of funny things that do happen along the way, and a lot of strange stories you get from different people. I mean, the one about the trained cockroaches, where one particular tenant wanted to complain about Augusto and his team, and she was probably a pretty filthy housekeeper herself, so she had tons of cockroaches inside the house. So her claim was that she didn't have the cockroaches, that Augusto and his team, when they came to do work on the outside, they brought the cockroaches. So I had a tough time, not laughing at her when she said that. But anyway, so I said, okay, I'll pay for the pesticide once, and from there on, it's up to you. So anyway, that was, there are a lot of fun things happen, and I do hope people will appreciate and perhaps have some similar experiences in property management and property owning.
A little light-hearted humor, everyone, in this chapter. Now, the chapter partners, chapter 12, including spouses. For many, working with partners and spouses can be advantageous, but equally, it can be challenging, or it can be a living hell. How did you face up to the delicate matter of human relationships in your corporate world, and all the people that you've had to deal with whilst doing this real estate journey?
Certainly. Well, first of all, ours was a family partnership, and my brother and I had divergent goals. He was in a position where he, as a real estate broker, sometimes it was feast or famine. He would sell a property, get a good commission, but then 2 or 3 months he wouldn't have much. So he was always looking to flip houses, a concept that I cringe at. Flipping houses, it can sometimes work for some people in certain markets where the market is increasing greatly, and if you have a great deal of cash to play with, it can work. But usually, more often than not, it's one fool selling to a bigger fool. So that quite often is a concept I like to avoid. But he and I went different directions for that reason. And when Dad was just kind of there as he was pretty retired, he was just kind of there as referee. So that had to go different directions. Beyond that, for partners, if you're married, you and your spouse have to agree on a plan and where you're going, because too often someone has a short-term vision of it. Maybe they again have heard about people flipping houses and making quick money on it, and it does happen in some occurrences, like I say, but more often than not, it backfires. So you have to have you have to set agreeable goals with any partner you have, especially your spouse, so you can move on. My wife and I have agreed that this has worked out for me, so we bought some additional houses together when she and I married, and they've worked out real well. So, and then of course, sometimes other partnerships have worked out well for me, in that somebody has some great handyman skills. I'm pretty useless in that area. I'm white collar. So
Me too. Me
you know, so
too.
I've had a partner with very good blue collar skills, so he can move in, improve the house, and then we have a plan. So we keep it a certain time and sell it. So you're also white collar, that don't have those blue collar skills. So anyway, you know, that can work out. But you know, the whole thing is with any sort of partnership, you want to have agreeable long-term goals and possibly an exit plan. So you know, if things don't work out, I can buy you out for this amount, and that way you don't have to go to court. You don't have to battle further on it. You have an exit plan, you know, drawn up.
Um, I get the impression, Daryl, that if you're going to go into this type of business, you've got to really take the long road, the long view. It's not a quick, short job, is it?
No, certainly not. You know, if you're looking for quick profits, maybe try the stock market. But to really make a real estate investment plan work in all of its divergent advantages, you know, the tax advantage as well as equity gain as well as positive cash flow, it's a long-term plan. Because as I've mentioned, I can raise my rents usually between 7 and 9% a year. So that's going to get me in better cash flow position. Real estate, especially in California, is going to go up in value. So you're going to build equity. But, you know, if you're expecting this all in 1 year, 2 years, yeah, you might be disappointed. You know, sometimes it works out, but usually, you know, a 5-10 year plan is more what you're looking for real estate investing. You know, mine was, you know, certainly many years, 30 or 40 years to become this successful. A couple of divorces along the way didn't help me. Oops, I'm not supposed to say that. Anyway, so on from there. Go ahead.
Moving on from partner relationships. Daryl, let's take the audience to the contents of the last two chapters in the book, chapters 13 and 14, minimizing losses when facing the inevitable downturn, because you're going to get the downturns, everybody, and trends of your friends. You cover off in this section overextended financially, COVID worldwide effects, real estate crash 2008, local economies and macro economies, affordability index, who is building, how many units, where and why, flipping houses, which we've all briefly touched on, buying foreclosures, adding ADU, affordable housing, government banning evictions, WhatsApp. A lot of powerful punches you've packed in these last two chapters. You are packing punches in this book right to the bitter end.
Okay. Yes. Minimizing losses at the downturn. So the whole plan is you're going to hit some bumps in the road. There's going to be some reversals in real estate where real estate will, you know, decrease in value. Maybe there's a local or a nationwide economic downturn. So what do you do in these cases? I was, you know, quickly overextended in my real estate plan. So I had to go back to the banks and say, hey, I can't afford this property. I want to give it back to you. And, you know, so I would try and avoid foreclosure and do a, you know, deed in lieu of foreclosure. So sometimes that works out. And, you know, other times, so, you know, in a perfect world, you would have enough cash assets to back you up, you know, through these downturns, or maybe have a parent or someone else or someplace else where you can get a short-term loan or get a loan to carry you for a few years in these downturns. You know, sometimes that works out. Sometimes you have to give properties back. In the huge downturn of 2008, which I blame on reckless banking practices, and I think a lot of others have kind of joined me in that opinion. My only answer to that, my only possible answer, was the Chapter 11, which is the business bankruptcy. So in that, you know, I went to the bankruptcy attorney. So we saw which houses I wanted to return to the banks, and we saw which houses I wanted to keep as is. And then others, I had to go back to the banks and say, we have to restructure these loans, or, basically the word is cram down the loans. So, in this case, Wells Fargo and some of the others were ready to work with me on this because they didn't want to take all the houses back. They already had too many houses they were having to take back. So they would work with me on this. So basically the way it worked, let's say I owed $200,000 on a house. The value had crashed, so it was now worth $120,000. So we would go back to the bank and say, let's cram this loan down to $100,000. Okay, so that worked out, and I was able to write off a great deal of debt in this manner. So that was one of the several approaches to the downturn. I mean, I think that's the ultimate approach, and one you certainly don't want to use, and you can't use often. But the Chapter 11 bankruptcy is a possible option.
When you were writing this book, how long did it take you? But did you learn anything yourself? Pick up new things, pick up new strategies?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I borrow a term from the stock market. Trends are your friends. So in that, I kind of made myself study the area more carefully. Say, okay, in what area are people planning on expanding, doing more businesses, expanding in houses, expanding in industry and other areas. And I refer to a friend of mine who used to invest in Southern California, and he was a friend and a colleague and a competitor actually on houses. And he was transferred to Chicago, and he found an area where there was a big auto plant that was going to be built in this smaller city. So that's what made trends are your friends. So he saw this trend. So they were going to be needing a great deal more housing in this moderate-sized city in the Midwest in order to accommodate all the new workers for this new upgraded auto plant. So he began investing there. So that was the trend that he observed. So it gave me a little more insight, and let's take a look when to invest and when an area is going to be expanding, and then find the expansion and the justification for it.
Would you do anything different, Daryl? When you first started to do this, would you do it differently? When you
yes, that's part of.
When you look back,
I appreciate the question. I mean, I think that would be best identified in the chapter on partners. As I mentioned, I think if my brother, my dad, and I could have written out our goals and been agreed on where we were going, chances are we could have done much better together. Then I had to take it from there. Beyond that, spouses, well, there's not a whole lot you can say about that, but I think that would be, I do point out some of the things I did here that I think were mistakes. I expanded too quickly. I had too many houses, so I very quickly, after a few years, I had to go back to the banks and say, hey, I want to give this house back to you. I've got more houses than I can afford. We've got a downturn here in the economy in the Inland Empire. So that would be one where I shouldn't have expanded as fast as I did. I should have taken it more grads, up to 29 houses in about 3 years. And that was too much too fast, and the economy turned the other direction on me. So, yeah, I do point out some of my mistakes in this area and things that I could have done, and I suggest to others that they make a more gradual gain in real estate rather than jumping in too quickly with too many properties.
Who do you want to see reading your book? Who are you aiming, the market for with this book?
Fine, good question, John. Appreciate that. I'm thinking an individual who might be making more than 100,000, or a couple who might be making together more than 100,000 a year, wanting to shelter that income, but then also wanting to invest, build equity, and finally to get in a position of early retirement with positive cash flow from the rental properties. So that's pretty much the people I'm addressing my book to, and a lot of that comes from my many years when I was working with several different excellent companies in scientific equipment. And people were always curious about, why was I tax exempt? What am I doing? Is it legal? And how do I do it also? So this is kind of advising to them. This is how you can make this plan work. And I do put some restrictions in there. I mean, I do say in an ideal world, you'd like to be within an hour's drive of your property, because I make the point, who's going to take advantage of or cheat the remote landlord? Well, just about everyone. The tenants, if they don't think you're supervising the property, they'll junk it up. Handymen, if you're not going to inspect the work that they do, they'll charge you. I just had a problem with that just last week, being overcharged by an electrician. So it goes on, but those are some of the suggestions that are made in the book.
Where can people get your book from?
Amazon, just about anywhere, and then of course, Author House directly, or Amazon. So yes, please take a look. It's available in various different versions, and the ebook as well as the soft cover. And this is the hard copy I of course have, and I give out to friends and colleagues.
There you go, everyone. It's an interesting book, and if you want to go and look into the area of real estate, rentals, have a look at Daryl's book. I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening, watching, wherever you're in the world. Until next time, stay safe.